we're talking abstractly here
Yeah.
about people and books that, maybe the people out there aren't familiar with. Tiantai set up a system called the 5 flavors of Buddhism,
Right.
which later was called by Miao Lo the 5 periods, because these flavors were associated with different periods of the Buddhist teaching.
Right.
And if you look at these 5 flavors, it's a way of progressing through Dharma practice.
Absolutely.
So the first the first flavor period is the flower garland period. And what is the Flower Garland Sutra? But, 1,000 pages or more in Cleary's translation of this phantasmagoria
Right.
of interpenetration of worlds, interpenetrating other worlds, and thousands of Buddhas.
Pushing
every pore of our body.
pushing the envelope out.
Yeah. So what you get is this grand vision of here is what reality is like, expressed in mythic, poetic terms, when you see the world with the eyes of a Buddha.
Mm.
So the Flower Garland Sutra is like the opening. What is it? The opening chorus. If
Right.
you go to see a play.
Right.
The opening, the overture.
Overture. It's
The
getting you
overture.
prepared. Right.
And it's
Setting
preparing you, and it's inspiring you, and it's saying, here's where we're going.
Right. The potential.
Potential, right. But then you have to kind of come back down to earth and start where you are. You have to start where you are. So the next flavor or period is the Deer Park discourse of the Buddha and the things that follow from that. So the Buddha's first vocal discourse, because the flower garland is basically the Buddha sitting there with a whole bunch of bodhisattvas
Right.
speaking around him and expressing his
Painting
vision.
a picture, yes.
Right. So the Buddha's first discourse, and the first discourse of the historical Buddha traditionally is when he goes to the Deer Park, finds the 5 ascetics that he used to practice with, teaches the 4 noble truths, to understand suffering, cut off its causes, realize the cessation of suffering, and cultivate the path leading to that cessation. And that's really where the rubber hits the road. That's where you start where you are and keep
Moving
going.
forward, right.
And Tiantai Juri himself shows this isn't just a teaching for beginners. The understanding of the 4 noble truths goes all the way through to the end, but
Absolutely.
your understanding of it gets more and more subtle, more and more refined. So here in this Deer Park period is where you learn basic precepts, where you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, where you learn here are wholesome causes and here are unwholesome causes.
Right.
I shouldn't be killing and stealing and sleeping around and lying
Right.
and getting intoxicated. Just basic stuff to get your house in order. And when you've done that, then you can move into the third flavor period, which is called Vaipulya, which means expanded. Now the teachings are going to expand.
Right.
And they're going to expand your mind and heart. So now you can think about not just getting your own house in order, but aspiring to be a bodhisattva, or taking up the bodhisattva way, which is aspiring to become a Buddha yourself. And taking up the 6 perfections, being generous, having self-discipline so you don't harm yourself or others, having patience, not just with other people or bad circumstances, but patience with the challenge of the Dharma teachings.
Right.
Having the energy to follow through on this, meditating to get calm and focused, and then finally developing your own wisdom. Not just book knowledge or conceptual knowledge or
Right.
just following
Moving
someone
beyond
else's
that,
words. Yeah. So you follow these 6 perfections. You aspire to maybe to be reborn in the Pure Land so you can learn more and more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you move from there into the 4th period, which is the perfection of wisdom period. Because now your mind's been filled with all kind of categories and
Right.
techniques, 4 noble truths, 8-fold path, middle way, 6 perfections.
Now you have to let go.
Blah, blah.
He says,
now you have to
gotta let go.
sweep the decks, let it go. It's
Right.
all empty. Don't get attached even to this material. So the perfection of wisdom is the letting go, emptiness. And the problem with that is you could get stuck there.
Oh, absolutely.
You
Very
get
easy.
stuck at just coasting.
Or you could get stuck before that,
You
too.
get stuck before, right.
Right.
So that's why there's a 5th period, which is characterized by the Lotus Sutra and also the Nirvana Sutra, which
Right.
reiterates the Lotus Sutra as far as Tiantai was
The
concerned.
harvest and the gleaning.
The harvest and the gleaning, right.
Yeah.
So in the Lotus you see, everything's empty, but that's a positive, not a negative.
Right.
It's empty of fixed substance,
But it's also full of potential.
full of compassion,
Compassionate.
full of selfless compassion,
Absolutely.
where everyone gets to be Buddha. Everyone expresses what the Buddha was expressing in the flower garland period. But
Mhm.
now everyone's included, no one's shut out. In a sense, you've come back to that first period, but in a more
Full
full
circle.
way.
Right.
And now it's made explicit that everyone will be included.
That's phenomenal.
Right.
That's the
So that's
phenomenal.
not just a path of academic understanding or a path of rating sutras for sectarian
Right.
purpose. It's a path of cultivation and development.
Because we have to understand that of course, the classification of sutras differs in each school.
Right.
And so therefore, but the most basic one that is followed by most schools, of course,
Yeah.
is Tiantai.
Right.
So let's move on from there. Let's go on to the last one is Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
Okay? Because Tibetan Buddhism, of course, is one of the most well-known.
Yeah.
We see we love the Dalai Lama. We see him all the time.
Yeah.
Very nice person, wonderful. He's brought many people to Buddhism.
Yeah.
Of course, he's also brought up many discussions about separation of religion and politics.
Yeah.
Now, let's say somebody is in Tibetan Buddhism, wants to understand Nichiren Buddhism, or has been brought up in Tibetan Buddhism and would like to study
Yeah.
Nichiren Buddhism.
Well, first of all, I want to say that my understanding of Tibetan Buddhism is not anywhere near my understanding of, like the Pali Canon or East Asian Mahayana.
Right.
I haven't spent a lot of time with it. I haven't spent a lot of time around Tibetan practitioners. Pretty much my only experience was going to the Shambhala Center in the late 80s and learning meditation there. It seems to me that a lot of people attracted to the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism are being attracted to their tradition of shamatha vipassana, this tranquility and insight meditation, to basic Buddhist teachings
Right.
on wholesome conduct, and a lot of the Dalai Lama's more popular books are really on a very beginner level.
Well, even as to
Loving kindness,
happiness.
and happiness. Yeah.
That seems to be a central theme to
Right.
because the Dalai Lama exudes happiness and
Right,
and
right.
peace. That's why people
Right.
always look at him.
Yeah.
And
So
say,
a lot of them don't seem to go beyond the self-help level
Right.
of Buddhism, and now then there are a lot of people who do take initiations and empowerments, and sometimes I have the suspicion that a lot of them collect initiations and empowerments like baseball cards.
Oh, yeah,
They don't
that's
actually do
absolutely.
those practices.
Right.
They just
it's like collecting daimoku. It's the same thing.
Right. Right.
I got this empowerment. Because there's a lot of very difficult practices
Yeah.
that you have to do in order to prepare for
Right.
empowerments.
Right.
And also empowerments offer specific reliefs.
Right.
If you're sick, usually they're attended by many people with cancer.
Right.
Sometimes it reminds me of Benny Hinn a little bit,
Yeah,
in that sense. But, that there is especially the main difference is the guru tradition
The Guru Yoga.
of the Tibetan tradition.
Yeah.
That you need. It can come down. Sometimes in Zen Buddhism, they have the idea of the Roshi or master
Right.
that you need a direct link. But the guru tradition is very specifically Tibetan Buddhism,
Yeah.
which is
And
obviously different than ours.
Right, and in the last session I talked a little bit about this as well, where Nichiren wrote in Shugo Kokodan that one needs to find a good teacher, but in the latter age of the Dharma, in this age where we're far removed from the time and the spirit and the circumstances of the Buddha, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to really find a qualified teacher.
Absolutely.
So the reliable teacher we can take is the Lotus Sutra itself. Actually, Shugo Kokodan, I think he also says End the Nirvana Sutra. But again, that's the reiteration, an elaboration, maybe.
Right.
So, and in Nichiren, throughout his writings, quotes the criteria of the Nirvana Sutra to follow the Dharma, not the person. And there's like 4 criteria. Follow the intent and not the letters.
Right.
Follow wisdom rather than just conceptual knowledge. What's one of the other ones? There's 4.
There's 4 of them, and this is stated in the Nirvana Sutra.
Oh, follow the sutras that are final in meaning, not
Right.
the ones that still need to be interpreted.
Interpreted, right.
And then finally follow the Dharma, not the person.
Right.
And he quotes this again and again because Nichiren's warning us not to just follow a personality cult,
Right.
that we need to make a direct connection with the sutra. And in fact, in Nichiren Shu, we say we inherit the Dharma directly from the scrolls of the Lotus Sutra.
Whereas in the guru tradition, it's very specific. You inherit it from your guru.
From your guru, right.
Right.
Or if you're in the Zen tradition, you have to go to the master.
Right.
And that's I think that's a significant difference. We're as priests, our job is to facilitate people making their own direct connection to the
Right.
sutra, not to be mediators,
Right.
not to
Even
not
not
to
you're not.
make
I
people
think
go
you're not
through
stating mediators. I think you're talking about, the person who not only facilitates but how do you say,
He's the
awards, because ultimately the award comes from the guru,
Yeah.
you know. And so and of course, the influences, as we were talking about before, Buddhism in its assimilation,
Mm-hmm.
of course, Tibetan Buddhism is very deeply influenced by the Bon tradition. You know,
No, I sometimes think that's overrated.
of course it's overrated in specific parts, because we have to know, and
Well, what I mean
Tibetan
is-
Buddhism is vast.
Yeah, people look at all the magic and esotericism of Tibetan Buddhism and they say, well, that's because of Bon, but
Not
not really,
necessarily,
no,
no.
because you find that in the esoteric sutras and traditions coming right out of India.
Well, I don't think the Bon tradition influenced the esoteric part. I think it influenced the organizational part.
Yeah, okay.
As that you have
Yeah.
the Tolku
Right,
and those
right.
kinds of groupings.
Right.
Those are specifically from incorporating the Bon
Right.
tradition.
Right.
I don't think that necessarily, besides animism,
Yeah.
you know, that was all that much, and systematization of the
Yeah.
of the system. I think that was a contributing of Bon,
Yeah.
but that of course incorporates and supports from a basic tradition the guru idea.
Right, right.
You know.
Now, another big difference would be the role of the esoteric,
Yes.
because Nichiren was extremely critical of the position or role Mikyo, or secret teachings, had taken in Japan in the 13th century. And, you know, he looked at the Tendai school, he was ordained as a Tendai monk, and he knew that the Tendai school should be about the Lotus Sutra. But instead, it had become all about the esoteric sutras and
Well, it went
practices.
back and forth. Sometimes the Lotus Sutra was held in more esteem. Suddenly they were equal. Suddenly it was less.
Right.
You know,
Well,
all
by his
those
time, it had become less.
less, right?
And the argument that was being made by Tendai leaders
Yes.
was that the Lotus Sutra and the esoteric sutras, especially the Dainichi Kyo,
Right.
the Mahavajracana Sutra, were the same in teaching.
But the
Principles
mudra
the
made
same.
it different.
But the Mahavajracana Sutra had taught mudras, mantras, and mandalas, so it was superior in terms of practice.
Right.
You know, and Nichiren points out that that's not true, that the principles taught in the Lotus Sutra cannot be found in the text of the Mahavajracana Sutra. In fact, I've read the translation of the Mahavajracana Sutra, and as far as I'm concerned, Nichiren's right.
But the school itself, one of the other criticisms that Nichiren said is that in order to kind of show that it was superior, it incorporated those teachings and took them on as their own, even not knowing where they came from.
Right, well, those who translated and wrote commentaries on the esoteric sutras incorporated Tiantai
Right.
teachings, because they came after Tiantai.
Well, that's a different thing. That's a very important thing what you said, because that was something in Chinese Buddhism, whereas in Nichiren Buddhism tends to do without commentaries as much.
You're right.
When I read a sutra, the commentary was usually twice as long as the sutra
Yeah.
itself, and the commentary is where I understood the sutra, because in reading the sutra, usually one page would take you longer than forever to
Right.
understand. Whereas the commentary, you had somebody giving you the information,
Right.
and therefore you're like, these are our masters, these are our teachers. I'm going to take whatever they say and
Right.
just repeat it.
So you're always approaching the sutra through a filter. Someone else's
Absolutely.
filter. And to be fair,
Nichiren does
and
that
Nichiren
as
does
well.
that too, except our filter is Tiantai.
But usually most people, Nichiren's writings are not, especially in
Yeah.
Nichiren Shu, the first thing people learn about.
Yeah.
And usually that is something also that needs to
Yeah.
be deeper.
Nichiren does directly point to the sutra, and Nichiren's rationale for relying so much on Tiantai and Miao wasn't just because he was a Tendai monk, but because he believed Tiantai and Miao had the most fidelity to the
Right.
words of the sutra. You know, and that's where we should do our own double checking. We should read these sutras and commentaries and do our own double checking. Is that true?
Yes.
We don't have to take his word for it.
We don't have to
We
take
can
anyone's
look
word
directly,
for it.
right?
So,
So, and that is a major difference with Tibetan Buddhism, because they almost never approach sutras directly. It's almost always through commentaries.
through commentary, and
Right.
also the word of the teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the argument that Nichiren makes in criticizing Mikyo was that the mudras, mantras, and mandalas are not more important than these principles of the universal nature,
The
of
eternal
Buddha,
nature, the
universal
yeah.
eternal nature, and the immediacy of Buddha nature.
Yes.
I often think of the one vehicle is about the universality of Buddha nature, and the eternal Buddha is about the immediacy of it. It's here and now,
yeah.
not there and then or in the future.
Right.
It's universal and it's immediate. And that is much more important than mudras, mantras, and mandalas. And those things are not taught in the Mahavajrana Sutra itself. Maybe you could say by implication they are, but
Right.
but Nichiren's point is, and Tiantai before him, was that it's explicit in the Lotus Sutra.
Right.
So the thing is that the Vajrayana Buddhism today makes the same claim that Nichiren was critiquing back in the 13th century.
Absolutely.
That the Tantras are the same in principle as the highest teachings of Mahayana, but because they have these secret techniques, it's superior.
Right.
Well, we don't agree with that.
Right.
We don't agree that secret techniques are a superior
Right.
way of Buddhism.
And actually, in some ways, we may say that they are limiting, and that if the true Dharma isn't something that
Right.
is held in secret.
It's making it Hinayana again, because
Exactly.
it's restricting it to a certain elite group of people who can
Right.
afford to pay for initiations,
The upper
who have the
middle class.
time to,
Upper middle
once
class.
again, the upper middle class way.
Some of those empowerments are not cheap.
Right.
So as we see here, I'd like to thank you for that. As we see here, we just had another great discussion of differences. So, of course, we as Nichiren Shu Buddhists love our brothers and sister Buddhists in the other traditions and respect them very deeply.
Even if they're all going to the Beachy Hill.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
we just throw that out at parties, and to tell people where they're going. But one thing that we can see is that, when Buddhists sit together and have a conversation, the sincerity is to get to the truth. And we understand that of all of our brothers and sisters in Buddhism, even that of the SGI and Nichiren Shoshu and the other Buddhisms, and we once again love discussion and learning and going forth, emptying our cup over and over again. So I thank you very much, McCormick Shonin, again for doing this segment, and we'll have our next segment on people coming to Nichiren Shu Buddhism from other faith backgrounds other than Buddhism, so
non-Buddhist.
non-Buddhist, and we're going to talk about some of those questions which we had from BuddhaNet.net. So thank you very much.